So I realized that the cell membrane was the equivalent of a computer chip, and that the environment was actually typing on the surface of the cell, because on the surface are these receptors, which are the equivalent of keys on a keyboard. So when information from the environment would hit the appropriate receptor, would send a signal in the cell and control the hard drive and the programming. And while I was doing this, I realized, oh my goodness, the difference between one human and another human is that on the surface of our cells, we each have a unique set of receptors, like keys on a keyboard. And that each of us has our own set of unique antennas called self-receptors. What was relevant about this was I realized is that if you take the self-receptors off the surface of the cell, you lose the identity. And then I said, wait a minute. The identity is not actually the self-receptors, it's what's being picked up by the antenna. And all of a sudden they said, but the antennas are on the outside of the cell, and they're reading the environment. And then it said, oh my God, my identity is an information from the environment that's being picked up by these keys and then played into the system. Well, immediately the first thing that came across my head was, but if the cell dies, the environment is still there, and my identity is somewhere out here. And it's like, all of a sudden, it's just like, blew me away, because here I am living in a mechanical, physical, biomedical world of here you are, then you die, then you're dust, and then all of a sudden I start to realize my identity is not even inside the cell. My identity is a signal in the environment. So a body is like a television set, and the antennas are receiving a station, so I'm playing the Bruce show right now. And what was relevant about that was at that very instant I realized, yeah, but when a picture tube breaks on a television, you say the television's dead. And then I say, yeah, but did the broadcast stop? And that's where I realized, oh my God, the identity is a continuously playing broadcast, and the body is a television set that comes and goes. And all of a sudden it says, immortality. And here it's like, but I'm not a physical mortal, I am an energy mortal, I'm part of the field, I'm something out there that's being picked up. Well, from 1 minute, you know, a whole life of 40-some years of mechanical biology, genes, biochemistry, and all that, and then 1 minute later, after understanding this, it's like, immortality, spirit, and all this other stuff. It was like, wow, it was a real blow of my mind kind of understanding. And yet the reality is, once I started to move into this plane, I started to recognize the value of this information. I started to recognize the value of the thoughts, the energy fields, and all this. And what was more important as a scientist for me was, funny, because I was so excited by the mechanical stuff that I couldn't wait to tell anybody. If I could get people into a room and sit down and say, look how this thing works. If you see how it works, it's the most amazing thing in the world, because you can create the most wonderful life if you understand it. And people in the audience would go, you know, Lipton, your life doesn't look that good for a guy who says you know this stuff. And that was my second wake-up call. My second wake-up call was a simple reality. Just because I became consciously aware of this information, it didn't change the life that I had. And I had to then start to understand it was more than just information. I had to get into the nature of the mind and the subconscious mind and the conscious mind, and start to realize just because knowledge came into my conscious mind, it didn't change the programming of my life. And this is the big issue that most people have in today's new age world, is like, I read the self-help book, I went to the lectures, I went to my psychiatrist, and we found out all the reasons why my life is this way, and yet my life is still this way. And it's like, this is exactly where I was myself. The point is, the conscious mind learns in a different way than the subconscious mind. So while I had all this magnificent knowledge about how I could make a wonderful life, my programs were still from my childhood, were still limiting me and preventing me from experiencing it. But the fun part as a scientist was to try to understand the nature of this, then start to rewrite the programming, which I ended up doing, to find out, for example, that I do live in heaven. And this is my life today, and now it's much more exciting to go out and tell people about this information, because not only can I tell them about how this information arises, but I can tell them about how this information becomes incorporated in their lives, and how you can use this information to create health and happiness and harmony on this beautiful planet.